Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a list of some series I should probably DNF. Some of these I am more than likely not going to keep going with, but then some of them I am still planning on continuing on even though I didn't absolutely love one of the entries in the series, the most recent entry, or I didn't like the first one and I'm just like, I guess I'll finish maybe. And the first one on this list would be Skyward and Starsight by Brandon Sanderson. I loved Skyward so much. The beginning for me, it was a little more youthful in tone than I was expecting, which is completely fine. It was just kind of like, oh, okay, this is almost borderline middle grade, maybe a good entry into young adult sci-fi. That's kind of how I felt about the first one. But that was only at the beginning, and then from there, I felt like the character growth of the main character, the friendships that are developed, the camaraderie, and the action scenes, it was fast-paced. There's just so many things about that first one I ended up loving and adoring. A little bit, I feel like a lot of the things I loved sort of took a back seat with this second one, and I had certain expectations based off of that first one of what I was going to get in the second. I thought it was going to build on the things from the first, and instead we in some ways took a very similar plot with the first one and we put it in a slightly different place in the second, but then we explored the world building so much more that I didn't feel like the things I loved about the first one that were kind of sort of done with a similar plot were really done the way I loved in the first. It felt a little convenient sometimes. I didn't love it. I felt like it was a necessary entry to the series. But this is one that I am absolutely planning on continuing on with because I do think that Sanderson almost always ends up giving me very satisfying conclusions. This one is just maybe not going to be my favorite entry in this series, but I feel like if I had never read any Sanderson's books before, I might have picked up the second one and then been like, oh, I didn't love it. I don't know if I'm going to keep going. The next one is going to be super random, and that would be Once a King, which, by the way, I know this isn't important, but this is one of those, it's right on the cover prints, and there's like an art print that came with it, which is really cool. I found it at a local used bookstore, which is awesome. But this particular series, the first one we have Ever the Brave and Ever the Hunted. And then this one is listed as book 3. So when I was reading the second one, I was like, wow, things are starting to really wrap up. And then I got to the end and things did wrap up. And it was a really, like, this is the end, very conclusive ending. And I was like, wait, but I know there's a third one. I own it. And it even says on Goodreads, it's the third one. And I was like, what? So I was a little confused. But it turns out what it really is, after having read those two, it's more like a duology and then a companion story that chronologically takes place after the duology. So it is part of the series, but it's also separate. When I read the first one, I enjoyed it fairly well, and I wouldn't say it was a new favorite, but I liked certain elements of it. So I was like, I'm gonna go ahead and give the series a go because I found the next two at my local used bookstore. So I was like, okay, I'll pick up the next two because I would like to keep going with this. And if I had known it was more like a duology with a companion, I don't know that I would have done that. Plus the duology, while there were elements, the romance specifically in the story, not that it's explicit or anything like that, it's not really a romance. It's a fantasy story about a girl whose father is killed early on in the story, and then she is tasked with finding his killer, and she's a fantastic tracker, so it's somewhat atmospheric because there's a lot of a forest setting and being in the outdoors, and they think the person that killed her dad was her childhood best friend / crush. It had a pretty good setup. I liked the main character. I felt like there wasn't really a lot of the annoying things that you find in romances in subplots of fantasy books, so I liked that first one. I picked up the second one, and then we got all sorts of annoying tropes. Like, we got a love triangle that felt like this is only here so that the character can realize how they really feel about someone else. And I don't know. The second one was okay, but I would have liked maybe if it was just like the first one was a little longer, and then maybe we had this one, which is about a different character from the second one. Anyway, I have it, and I'm gonna read it eventually because, you know, I have it and I'm interested in seeing, you know, maybe as a spin-off. I'll love this one a ton, but I also feel like if I didn't own it, I don't know that I would have picked it up. This next one's gonna hurt some of you. I'm very sorry. I do plan on continuing on with this series, and I did plan on continuing on with it last quarter, but then all the crazy things started happening in the world, and I couldn't go to the library, and I even checked at my local used bookstore at one point, and they didn't have any copies of it, and I was like, I'll just wait till the winter. It feels better suited for that time of the year anyway. That would be the Farseer Trilogy by Robin Hobb. I think Robin Hobb's prose is very good. It's almost somewhat formal, but it does kind of have, for me in the very first book, an interesting contrast from the writing style to that of the main character. The main character in the first book is a child, and it's super tragic and depressing, and this character is an illegitimate child of a royal person, and because they technically could have some claim to power, people that are in power want to keep him close and keep him from really ever having a life of his own, because if he goes out and explores the world, maybe someday he'll want to come back and take the throne. So very quickly, the main character realizes they have very little independence and freedom for their own life, and the avenues that they could take in life have been heavily restricted because of the decisions of his parents, essentially. You do feel bad for this character. It's a character-led story, which I usually really love, but because the writing style is more formal, it does have this I'm kind of telling you my life story sort of feel, because the main character is an adult and then they're showing you their life as a child. But it's still from the lens of a child who's like kind of not really aware of what's going on, and you get some hindsight is 2020 where you can kind of see through the narrative what's going on, but at the same time you sort of have to pick up on it yourself as the adult reading through the lens of a child. And child main characters in adult fantasy, for that reason, sometimes can really frustrate me, because I'd rather they be in it and then scheming alongside everyone else or trying to be better than everyone else and stuff, and instead it's like, I just can't control anything because I'm a kid. I feel bad for you. But when your character can't have a lot of agency because of their circumstances, and they can't have a lot of agency because they're a child, then you're just kind of observing things with them. And that's just not my favorite kind of story. Now, the reason I'm continuing on is because I'm hoping, because the character ages through the series, that I will start to not feel that way. This is obviously just a personal hang-up. It's not like it's a flaw of the story or anything, but I am hoping that because the character is older in the next ones, that I'll feel differently. The next two, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about because I did just recently do an unhaul and I mentioned these books, and that would be Girls of Paper and Fire and Dead House Gates. Dead House Gates, the Malazan series. I mean, I was hoping that with picking up this second one, I would start to see all the amazing things that everybody loves about the series who are fans of it, because the first one, fans are like, it's really not a good indication, but the second one's way better. And I do like that we spent a little bit more time with specific characters. It was less of a bird's eye view than the first one. The first one is building a foundation for this epic, and I think that that's very appealing to a lot of people, and I liked the idea of that. I feel like the characters in these books, I just don't really feel connected to them, and I don't really think that's what the series is about. I think it's more thematic, and I love good themes in a story, but I usually like also really great characters, and I'm not saying the characters are bad, I just don't feel like they're the main focus. With Girls of Paper and Fire, I just thought there were certain elements of the story that were really well done. I think the author took a lot of care with some very difficult themes, topics, difficult situations in general, but ultimately I just found myself wanting the story to have been slightly different. I think if it had just been one really long, maybe not super long, but I just would have liked maybe a longer standalone. Just like with those two, the book King of Scars by Leigh Bardugo is one that I really didn't care for. I loved the first half, and then I didn't like the second half. It's not that I didn't care for it because I thought it was a piece of trash book or anything like that. I just didn't like the direction the plot went in. That's it. I just kind of was like, could this have been different? Because of that, I really don't like that direction it went in. I don't think I'll like the next one, but I also want to know what happens, so I will probably pick up the second one. The last one on this list is kind of more like an honorable mention, because it technically is its own series. I haven't started it yet, but it's a continuation of a different series, and that would be the Shattered Realms series by Cindy Williams Chima, who wrote the Seven Realms series, and I really enjoyed the Seven Realms series quite a bit. This follows some of the next generation of characters. In general, continuations are really tricky for me. I don't end up usually loving them very much, and I've just heard a few things about some things in this series that I'm really nervous about. I don't know if I'm gonna like certain elements of it, and I love that original one so much that the biggest thing for me with continuations is don't change anything about the original. I want it to usually take place hundreds of years later, where I'm like, oh, okay, if any of those characters are dead, it's because time has passed. I don't want characters that I grew to love in the first one and have decided, you know, this air of mystery of you don't really know what happens once it says the end. Once you get to the end, you're like, you can kind of imagine what happens next. But then when it's like, wait, never mind, here's what's actually going to happen next. I don't usually like that. I'm really nervous about this one. However, I have heard mostly good things about this continuation, so I'm still planning on going through with it. That's it for some series I should probably DNF, but I still, for the most part, either want to keep going or will definitely keep going, or maybe someday I might come back to them. But anyway, let me know what some books or series are that you feel similarly about. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.